Philip and I started our own foundation with his inheritance, money that was legally his, money that had nothing to do with his parents' schemes. We focused on educational equity, on museum access for kids who looked like I did growing up, kids who deserved to see themselves in history and culture. I kept working at the museum. Philip joined me in cultural preservation work. We built something real, something good. The irony isn't lost on me. Victoria tried to pay me to leave because she thought I wasn't good enough for her world. She never saw the researcher, the investigator, the woman who spent years learning to uncover hidden truths in dusty archives. She never saw me at all. She saw my skin color, my background, my job title. She saw someone she could control, someone she could buy off, someone who would just disappear. She was wrong. We had a daughter 2 years later. We named her Grace. Not after anyone in particular, just because Grace is what we wanted for her. Grace to be herself. Grace to stand up for what's right. Grace to never let anyone make her feel small. I think about her future sometimes, about the world she'll inherit, and I know that she'll face challenges, that people will judge her, that someone might try to hand her a checkbook someday. But I also know that she'll have something Victoria never gave Philip. Parents who taught her that money doesn't make you better than anyone, that dignity isn't for sale, and that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply refuse to accept someone else's definition of your worth. Victoria and Charles eventually took plea deals, reduced sentences in exchange for cooperation. They're out now, living in a much smaller house in Florida, far from the spotlight they once craved. Preston runs a small consulting firm. I heard he and Claudia divorced. The pharmaceutical company continues under new leadership. The Westbrook name, once synonymous with prestige, is now a cautionary tale. And me? I'm still Natasha, still working at my museum, still researching, still teaching. Philip and I are still together, still in love, still building our life one day at a time. We're not billionaires anymore. Giving away most of his inheritance will do that. But we're happy. We're free. People ask me sometimes if I regret it, if I wish I'd just taken Victoria's money and walked away. The answer is simple. Not for a second. Because what she offered me was freedom from her family, yes, but it was also a chain. It was silence money. It was, let us keep doing what we're doing and pretend you never existed money. And I couldn't live with that. Some people see what I did as revenge, but it wasn't. Revenge is personal, emotional, hot. What I did was cold, calculated, and absolutely necessary. I didn't expose the Westbrooks because Victoria hurt my feelings or made racist comments or tried to control my wedding. I exposed them because they were breaking the law, because they were stealing from charities, from sick children, from research that could save lives. The fact that it also freed Philip from their toxic influence, that was just a bonus. The quiet ones are always underestimated. The ones who smile politely, who don't make scenes, who seem to just accept the way things are. But silence isn't acceptance. Sometimes silence is just observation. Sometimes the person you think you're controlling is actually 3 steps ahead, seeing everything, remembering everything, waiting for exactly the right moment. Victoria thought she knew what kind of woman I was. She thought I was someone who could be bought, someone who could crumble under pressure, someone who didn't belong. She never considered that maybe, just maybe, I didn't want to belong to something so hollow. She never considered that her world, with all its money and prestige and carefully maintained appearances, was built on lies. And she definitely never considered that a museum researcher with a laptop and time could dismantle it all. If this story moved you, don't just watch, share it. Hit that like button, drop a comment about a time you stood up for yourself, and subscribe, because we're telling more stories that need to be heard. Real stories, human stories, stories about people who refuse to be broken. The world tries to put us in boxes, tries to tell us where we belong, tries to price our dignity. But some things aren't for sale. Remember that. And remember that the truth, when it finally comes out, doesn't care about your last name or your bank account. It just is. See you in the next one. She made comments about genetics that made my skin crawl. Philip and I wanted to wait to enjoy being married first, but to Victoria, that was proof of my selfishness, proof I was just using her son. The final straw came at a family board meeting. Philip wanted me involved in some of the family business decisions, especially the charitable foundation. I had experience with nonprofits, with cultural organizations. I could help. But Victoria and Charles shut it down immediately. "She's not really family," Preston said, right there in that boardroom. Philip went pale. I felt something inside me crack. But it was what happened next that changed everything. Victoria invited me to lunch, just the two of us. I should have known something was wrong. She'd never wanted to spend time alone with me before. We sat in a private room at one of those restaurants where they don't have prices on the menu. She made small talk for exactly 5 minutes. Then she reached into her purse and pulled out a checkbook. She slid it across the table like it was nothing. "Name your price," she said. Her voice was calm, matter of fact. "Leave quietly, leave now, and you'll never have to work another day in your life. You'll never have to pretend to fit into a world you don't understand. Save yourself the embarrassment, Natasha." I stared at that checkbook. My hands didn't shake, my voice didn't crack. I felt this strange calm wash over me. I stood up slowly, smiled at her, and said 7 words. "You're going to regret this, Victoria." Then I walked out, leaving the checkbook on that table. I didn't tell Philip right away. I drove home, sat in our apartment, and I thought about everything I'd seen over the past 2 years. I'm an anthropologist. I'm trained to observe, to notice patterns, to see what others miss, and I'd been watching the Westbrooks very carefully. I remembered strange conversations that stopped the moment I entered a room, financial documents left carelessly on desks, Victoria's paranoia about outsiders knowing family business, Charles's nervous energy whenever the foundation was mentioned. Little things, small things, things that hadn't made sense at the time, but now they formed a pattern. I started digging. I used the same research skills I used for my museum work. The Westbrook Foundation was public. Their tax documents were available. I compared their publicly stated donations to what was actually reported to the IRS. The numbers didn't match. Millions of dollars were unaccounted for. Donations they claimed to have made to hospitals, to schools, to research facilities. The money had been sent, but it never arrived at those places. I followed the trail. It took me 3 weeks. 3 weeks of late nights, of Excel spreadsheets, of cross-referencing documents, and I found it. Offshore accounts, shell corporations. The Westbrook Foundation wasn't just a charity, it was a tax shelter, a way to hide money, to avoid paying what they owed. Victoria and Charles had been doing it for years. When I finally told Philip, he cried. Not because he didn't believe me, but because some part of him had always known. He'd felt it, that wrongness, but he'd been raised not to question his parents. We sat together in our living room, surrounded by printouts and bank statements, and we made a decision. Not out of revenge, I want to be clear about that. We didn't do this because his mother tried to pay me off, although God knows that hurt. We did it because it was right. We contacted federal investigators. We handed over everything, every document, every spreadsheet, every piece of evidence I'd gathered. And then we waited. The news broke on a Tuesday morning. I was at work when my phone started buzzing. Westbrook Foundation under federal investigation. The IRS was involved. The FBI was involved. Millions in tax fraud, charitable funds diverted, offshore accounts frozen. It was everywhere, the news, social media, every financial publication in the country. Victoria's carefully constructed world collapsed in 48 hours. The pharmaceutical company's board forced Charles to step down. Their country club friends stopped calling. The same women who'd made backhanded compliments about how articulate I was now begged me for comments. I said nothing. I didn't need to. Preston tried to distance himself, claimed he knew nothing, threw his parents under the bus to save his own skin. The family that had been so united in their judgment of me turned on each other like wolves. Criminal charges followed. Victoria and Charles faced years in prison. Their lawyers fought, of course. People with that kind of money always fight. But the evidence was ironclad. I'd made sure of it. They thought marrying into money meant I'd stay quiet. His mother handed me a checkbook and said, "Name your price to leave." What happened next didn't just shock the family. It sent shockwaves through every billionaire circle in the country. This is that story. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications because stories like this, raw, real, and unfiltered, don't get told often enough. You won't want to miss what happens next. I never imagined my life would become a battlefield. My name is Natasha, and I grew up in a simple 3-bedroom house in Chicago. My dad was a high school teacher, my mom a nurse. We weren't rich, but we were happy. I became a cultural anthropologist, worked at a museum, spent my days surrounded by artifacts and history. I loved my job. I loved my life. It was small, it was mine, and it was enough. Then I met Philip at a charity auction for children's literacy. He was bidding on a first edition book, and so was I. We laughed about it afterward, shared a coffee, talked for hours about history and literature. He was kind, genuinely kind. We dated for 6 months before I learned the truth. Philip wasn't just comfortable, he was a Westbrook, the Westbrooks, a pharmaceutical dynasty worth over $4 billion. When he finally told me, I felt sick, not because of the money, but because I knew what it meant. I'd watched enough movies, read enough books. Money like that doesn't just come with privilege. It comes with expectations, with rules, with walls. But Philip held my hand and promised me it wouldn't change us. He promised we'd build our own life. I believed him. God help me, I believed him. We got engaged a year later, and that's when I met them, the Westbrooks. The estate in Connecticut looked like something out of a historical drama. Sprawling gardens, a driveway that seemed to go on forever, and a house that wasn't a home. It was a monument to wealth. Victoria Westbrook, Philip's mother, stood at the entrance like a queen greeting a peasant. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. Her handshake was limp, dismissive. Charles, Philip's father, barely acknowledged me, and Preston, Philip's older brother, looked at me like I was something stuck to his shoe. Dinner was torture. Every question felt like an interrogation. "Where did you two really meet?" Victoria asked, as if Philip had lied about the charity auction. "And what does your family do?" The way she said family made it sound like a disease. I told them about my parents, my father the teacher, my mother the nurse. The silence that followed was deafening. Claudia, Preston's wife, smiled sweetly and said, "How noble. Public service is so important." But her eyes said something else entirely. The microaggressions never stopped. At family gatherings, people mistook me for the help. At the country club, Victoria's friends complimented how well-spoken I was, as if they expected me to grunt. They asked to touch my hair. They asked where I was really from, as if Chicago wasn't American enough. And every single time, Philip would tense up, try to defend me, but his voice would grow smaller and smaller under his mother's glare. The wedding planning was a nightmare. Victoria wanted control of everything. She chose the venue, the flowers, the menu, everything. When I asked to incorporate some of my family's traditions, she looked at me like I'd suggested we served fast food. "We have a certain image to maintain," she said. I pushed back. I fought for every inch. My parents sat in the front row at that wedding, not the back. My cousin sang during the ceremony. I wore a dress that honored both of our cultures. Victoria smiled through gritted teeth the entire day. After the wedding, the real battle began. They wanted us to live in the family compound. We refused and got our own place in the city. Victoria showed up unannounced constantly, criticized everything from my furniture to my cooking. She tried to hire a full staff for us, "to help you, dear," but I knew they'd report everything back to her. I politely declined. That made things worse. Then they came for my career. I loved working at the museum. It gave me purpose, identity beyond being Philip's wife. But Victoria was mortified. She told her friends I volunteered there, refused to acknowledge I had an actual job with an actual salary. Preston made jokes about me playing anthropologist. Philip asked me to consider quitting just to keep the peace. I looked at him and said no.
That was my line in the sand. But nothing prepared me for the baby pressure. Victoria became obsessed with grandchildren, with continuing the bloodline.